Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hi, I am Aubrey, and I am Carla Peperzak's first great-grandchild, and everything you will hear and see in the following documentary actually happened to my great-grandma.
I'm a Holocaust survivor. When I was 18 years old, I joined the Dutch resistance and helped forge 100 IDs. I was able to help 40 Jewish people to survive World War II. My name is Carla Peperzak. And this is my story.
For years, Carla Peperzak never talked with her family about the things she did during the Second World War.
Growing up, we were really not allowed to approach my mother with anything, any discussion or questions on World War II. We knew she was a Holocaust survivor, and we knew she had been involved in the underground, but how, we did not know. We were just not allowed to talk about it, and that was, my dad set the rules and said, you do not talk to her.
My father worked for the United Nations, and during most of the years when I was growing up, and he would go off on what they called missions. So he would go to China for 4 weeks, or Nepal for 4 weeks, and my mother took care of everything. And she taught us to be a very confident, very independent, very survival-oriented person, which I think comes from some of that World War II Holocaust experience.
Every once in a while, somebody would bring up something based on what happened in school, whether there were discussions on World War II, and it tended to give her nightmares. So we learned pretty quick, you don't do that. The first time I ever heard her discuss the war and her experiences, my daughter here in Spokane was in middle school. I believe she was in 6th grade, and they read Anne Frank and were studying World War II. My mother was due to come for Mother's Day, and Megan comes trotting home and says, do you think Oma will talk about this? They call her Oma, that's Dutch for grandma. And I said, I'm not asking.
They were gonna be here while I was in school, and so I just asked her, and I remember she said yes, and my aunt was shocked. She was like, what? And I'm like, yeah, she said, yeah, because nobody, I think it was like, it wasn't like she explicitly said she didn't want to talk about it, but it was kind of understood, you don't ask. Nobody talked about it.
She said, yes, I'll come talk to you. And somewhere in my files, I still have the cassette tape because I sat in the back of the classroom and listened for the first time.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, just waiting for a few more students to come in. And then we are going to kick off this event. Carla Peperzak is here with me. Give a round of applause for Carla. Carla, are you ready?
I hope so.
All right, here we go. Okay, Carla, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm awfully grateful and happy to see all of you.
Well, you have a really clear purpose for sharing your story and the history of the Holocaust. What is that purpose for you? What do you hope to accomplish?
The main reason I talk is that people know that it happened. 6 million people, 6 million Jewish people were killed, which is almost unbelievable. What is 6 million people? The state of Washington a number of years ago had 5.9 million. That means everybody in the state of Washington would have been killed for that many people. It's very hard to understand. And I think the problem was that Germany was very highly educated, very cultural advanced, their music, their literature, and it still happened in a country like that. That means that it can happen anywhere.
Okay, I think we have a fair student or two that have a microphone. Is that right? Who has a question for Ms. Peperzak?
My question is that I wonder what the Holocaust was really about, because things get messed up in history all the time.
So what was the Holocaust really about? Why did it happen?
I think the girl was genuinely trying to find out what it was, but it shows that it's not as well known as those of us who work with it all the time would like to believe. My name is Ray Sun. I'm an associate professor of history at Washington State University, Pullman. I teach a lot about the Holocaust, genocide, and the World Wars. The Spokesman Review was running a story about Carla back in 2015. So I got a call out of the blue. It was a cold call, and they interviewed me for the context of life in occupied Europe. And through that, I got to know Carla's story. I'd never heard of her or met her before.
I'm Paul Regelbrug, Director of Education for the Holocaust Center for Humanity. So I was living in Spokane from 2009 to 2015, and so I was teaching here. I had already become aware of the Holocaust Center for Humanity, and I found out that they have a speakers bureau. I reached out to them and said, hey, I'm teaching sixth graders at the time, and I was teaching them lessons about the Holocaust. They said, well, Paul, we just now have a speaker who's sort of come on with us, and she happens to live in Spokane. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to meet her.
I'm Rabbi Tamar Molino. Carla is a member actually of both congregations here, and she's a very active member of our community. She comes regularly to Shabbat worship services. She's involved in various other organizations in the community, speaks with our children and our families, and is generally just a warm and engaged member of our congregations.
In my role now with the Holocaust Center, I've continued to know Carla. She has presented on our behalf for students both in Spokane and throughout the state of Washington. She is really calling me to make sure things are moving forward. You know I'm not going to be here forever, is what she tells me. So can you provide professional development for those teachers?
I would say that students' knowledge of the Holocaust varies. Some schools do a really good job on that, others barely touch it. I think their knowledge is pretty heavily centered on the worst end point of the Holocaust. What I think most of them don't know is how much societal preparation it takes to get to that point where a state can carry that out. The Nazis did not invent anti-Semitism. There's a very, very long tradition of hatred against Jews.
Well, I think even in recent years, there's even been more of a resurgence of anti-Semitism in Eastern Washington and Northern Idaho, and also all over the country. It's become more acceptable to say things that we would have thought were completely out of bounds.
As a teacher, I'd stand in the halls and kids would be passing. There was never a single passing period where kids weren't making race-based, cultural-based, some kind of comments against other people.
And they don't know Nazi history. All right, so they don't know why the Nazis came to power. They don't know why anti-Semitism works as a positive draw for the Nazis. It's a negative appeal. It's a negative attack, but it's a positive draw for the Nazis to get the Nazis into power.
And I see it manifest in a lot of different ways in the life of our community today. So the kids will tell me about Holocaust jokes that other kids make in school, and the kids in our community will say, do you realize that what you're talking about is the entire murder of my people? And when you say that, you're basically implying that you want me to be dead. And the other children don't, they're shocked, right? They didn't even understand that that's what they were saying.
As a college professor, I feel obligated to just mention there are some images in the documentary that are extremely raw and real and potentially disturbing, as the Holocaust, of course, was. So just wanted to prepare us all for that.
If you've studied the Holocaust before, then you've seen the horrific images and the footage of barbed wire fences, concentration camps, and dead, emaciated bodies, the results of state-sponsored hate. For Carla, she sees her friends and family that were murdered there. But despite the unbearable pain, she soldiers on because of her mission. Carla's mission is a giant bet. She thinks that if you and I and future generations know that the Holocaust happened, we'll ensure it won't ever happen again.
I know this is a lot to take in, but it is a very important message, and my great-grandma has gone through this, and it's very important to me and my family, and I just hope that everybody else gets to learn as much as I did from her experience.
Carla bets big on us because she knows we are capable of great things. Don't believe it? Let's start with a teenager named Anne.
Right before, around that time, we had all gone to Amsterdam as a big extended family, and we had gone and visited the Anne Frank house. And Oma had said she knew Margot, Anne Frank's sister, and so I think, I mean, it was a while ago, so I don't know exactly, but I'm pretty sure I did it under the context of like, she knew Anne Frank.
And that was my reaction too. It was crazy knowing that my great-grandma knew Anne Frank, or the girl who we learned about in school.
During the Second World War, Anne Frank and her family went into hiding in a small attic above an office here. And for 2 years, Anne kept a diary, which would become one of the most read diaries in the world. But before Anne and her family went into hiding, they lived here. Today, you can find a statue of Anne at the park there. And my great-grandmother, Carla, lived here, just around the corner, which is crazy to me.
We had a Reformed temple in Amsterdam, and actually it was formed by some friends of my father's. They started that in the 1935, I think, 36, somewhere in there. And I would go there, and also the rabbi. The rabbi actually came from Germany, Rabbi Mailer, and one of the people there, or two of them actually, was Margot Frank, Anne Frank's sister. She was in the same study group as I was. She was quite serious, actually, a little much more than Anne, and but she was very nice, and I really enjoyed being around her. She actually was also a rower. I don't know if you know that. She rowed a four. Most people were in fours, actually, because it was so much cheaper, the boat itself, than the eight. And she really liked it very much, so did I. She was not in the same rowing club as I was. She was in a different one.
And you should know, my great-grandmother was an athlete, and her sport was rowing, and she still loves it.
The club I belonged to, Poseidon, I went to visit them, maybe in 1960s, and they said, oh, come on, let's row. And I couldn't quite do it anymore. It was very difficult. The rowing itself, especially that, where you have one oar, and that it's a special way of handling the oars and all that sort of thing. And you have to be trained in that, and I wasn't trained in that, so it was difficult.
Rowing was one of the few sports that my great-grandmother was allowed to do when she was young. Even when she wasn't allowed to be left-handed, that never stopped her.
In Holland, in school, you learn, first grade already, they started you to teach how to knit and how to crochet and how to whatever. And being left-handed was not accepted in those years. So I had to learn how to write with my right hand, but knitting and sewing was very difficult. And I had a little canvas bag where all that stuff was in, and I couldn't do what the teacher wanted me to do, and I got so frustrated that I threw my bag in the teacher's face and walked out of the class. And they suspended me for 3 days. That was my left hand. But they eventually managed to make me write with my right hand. So. But I still don't knit and crochet very well. And I liked school. I just liked to learn. And I liked especially, I think, geography and history. I had a happy childhood and one sister who was just a year older than myself. And she loved clothes and she loved boys and she loved to go out with boys. And boys I had boyfriends, but I was going to study medicine and I wasn't interested in getting married or anything like that. It took about 5 days for the invasion, and there was a resistance to this, under the Netherlands army. Queen and the cabinet moved to England, went to England. The country surrendered. And they did actually, one of the reasons they surrendered was they bombed out the heart of Rotterdam. And they said the next city which will be bombed out is Amsterdam.
As Carla took her final exams, she could hear German bombs falling.
We were very, very worried. And that's why the government gave up. And almost immediately they installed a Nazi government. But they did also say, the Dutch people don't have to worry, we follow the laws. And the Jewish people definitely do not have to worry about it. We thought maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, but you didn't know.
Carla took this photo of her family at a cafe in July 1940. German soldiers are in the foreground.
My father was offered to go to the United States to join a manufacturing group in New York. And this was already in 1940. And at the time, he didn't think that was quite necessary. So he said no. He designed clothes. He was very artistic. Paris has a fashion center, but so was Berlin.
Carla's father owned his own factory and designed many outfits. This is a receipt from one of many sales for his fashion wear.
Life didn't change in the beginning so much. Actually, we went on vacation in 1940 and also 1941.
However, 1941 is also when new laws went into effect.
This was the Nazi government. The way they did it was very refined, that people thought, it's not so bad, because it just was one small thing.
The Nazis began not with a physical genocide, but by measures to exclude.
And of course, slowly but surely, a couple of months later, they started to dismiss Jewish professors and all the Jewish civil servants.
Once the Nazis come to power, they begin by eliminating Jews through laws, but for laws to work, a society has to support them. This is something else that a lot of people don't think about, that Nazi laws of segregation and exclusion only work when the grassroots supports it.
The schools, the students had to sign loyalty declaration to the German government.
Which means that they would tolerate language and images that would denigrate Jews. And that cuts Jews off.
In 1941, Jewish people had to start registering.
Carla registered as Jewish and received an ID card with a J on it. Carla's father knew the significance of this and began to devise a plan.
It's unbelievable how refined it was. All the businesses had to have a non-Jewish person owning it. Some of the businesses, some German businessmen came over and they just took it over.
In an effort to continue to operate the business, Carla's father named his brother-in-law, who was not Jewish, as the new owner of the factory.
And then, months later, there's another small thing. You couldn't go on a bus, and then you couldn't go to a regular store. They took away the bank accounts. They also confiscated everybody's radio. So you could not even listen to the radio anymore.
What was happening now to Carla and the Dutch Jews happened to the German Jews in the late 1930s.
Many students, when they're first learning about the Holocaust, they ask, why didn't they just leave? Think about, first of all, how hard it would be for any family to uproot itself and leave, period.
Everyone knows Anne Frank. The Frank family emigrated from Germany to the Netherlands in the early 1930s. Otto Frank, Anne's father, was really showing a lot of agency here. You know, he understood what Nazism meant. He was trying to protect his family. He moved himself, his family, and his business to Amsterdam.
Many did try to leave, but they couldn't. The world was aware of the problem that Jewish people were facing in Germany at that time. So it's the summer of 38, all these various countries come together and say, what are we going to do? Nobody stepped up to say that we will take in more Jews, relax our immigration quotas, caps, etc. One exception was England. They took 10,000 children only. So basically, that was a catalyst for Hitler and the Nazis. Look, all of you, see this, you meet together and you do nothing.
When we bring this into our own settings, let's take a high school or a middle school. Anytime it becomes normalized to talk about a certain group in very derogatory ways and demeaning ways, you're half a step away from saying they don't belong here. They're not only not as good as us, but they're a threat to us. And so marginalization was an essential precondition to elimination of Jews.
Just a few months later, in November 1938, Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, that basically begins state-sponsored violence. 30,000 plus Jewish men arrested and put into concentration camps, shops, synagogues. Synagogues were burned. Their German neighbors watching, doing nothing, as their previous friends, doctors, etc., are experiencing this horrific persecution.
On February 22nd and 23rd, the Nazis conducted sudden and violent roundups of large numbers of people. It was known as a razzia. The second one happened at Carla's rowing club. Many more would occur.
They could pick you up in the street, they could go to your home. You never knew when they would take anybody away.
1942 was a pivotal year.
1942 became real. By this time also, the German or the Nazi government had literally decided to get rid of all the Jewish people in Europe.
On July 15th, 1942, the Nazis started deporting Dutch Jews to Westerbork, a work camp. For most, it was a temporary stop before being sent to Auschwitz-Birkenau and Sobibor. These were death camps.
People were sent to camps, supposedly war camps. The newspapers would not publish any of that, of course. And the news we got was completely what the Germans wanted us to know.
At the time, no one knew about these death camps. They only knew that if you were put on a train to Westerbork, few ever returned.
So it was hide or...
The people who went into hiding before they came to pick them up. I mean, we were just trying to outguess them.
The Nazis had required everyone to previously register with a new ID. This registry created government knowledge of who was Jewish.
By this time, everybody had a registration, ID as we called it. The ID for the Jewish people had a J next to the picture.
And Jews were required to wear a star on their clothing at all times. This is Carla with her friends wearing their stars. Even when getting married, you still had to wear your star. Because Carla's mother was raised Catholic, Carla's father hired a lawyer to remove the J from Carla and her sister's IDs.
My ID had a J on it, and my father managed to get the J off.
She has her father to thank for this because he used contacts to take her Jewish identity out of her identification papers that enabled her to pass as a non-Jew.
September 1942, I got my new ID, and I did not have to wear a star. All of a sudden, life became completely different for me because now I could go in the streetcars or trains or railroad or buses. I could go in the stores which had been closed for Jewish people. And so this uncle of mine contacted me and asked if I could find a place for them to go into hiding. I mean, when somebody asks you for help, and you can do it, you won't think about it. You say, hey, I see what I can do to help. So I think that's, I don't know how I got there, but I do know that my immediate reaction was, if they asked for help, you try to help. This was a bit more dangerous, but you tried not to think of the danger. You try to make the best of it.
She was young, she was very athletic, she probably felt invincible, just like I think most teenagers think that they're bulletproof.
When I'd be working with students and they try to think about the people who were taking risks to hide, they try to think, would I be willing to risk my life to save somebody? Yes, but whenever you add in, would I be willing to save or protect somebody because I thought it was the right thing, but the consequences wouldn't be just me that they would imprison or worse, but also my husband or wife, my children, my mom or dad, and that's where it gets really tricky.
If Carla had been caught helping Jewish people go into hiding, she and her family would have been imprisoned or executed by the Nazis.
I think it's very important to be able to know what your values are, to know what is right to you, what is just to you, and what is unfair and unacceptable to you. And usually we don't have much warning or any warning when we're asked to make larger moral decisions. You're never too young to start to make your own decisions about who you are and what you believe in.
It always strikes me every time. To live through what they went through and to rise to the occasion. What an awesome generation that was.
And I knew somebody very well, actually, they were neighbors. And I contacted them and I said, do you know, is there anybody, any place they could go into hiding? That's how it all started. He got me connected with the right people, and we found a place for them to go into hiding. And I helped them to go there. You know, you just don't take an automobile or a streetcar or a tram.
Carla got them onto a train, and they journeyed to the countryside north of Amsterdam, where they could hide. But there was a problem hiding the children.
Here you see a picture of the two little ones when they went into hiding. One was just over 2 years old, and the other one, I think, about 4 or 4.5.
Carla's young cousins couldn't be expected to stay silent in an attic. They had to be hidden in plain sight with other families.
So we found a place for 2 different places for the 2 little girls, and there they were treated as youngsters with, they said it was a niece or a cousin or whatever.
The cousins were given new names and trained to forget their identities for protection. But this created another problem when one had to be moved to another family to keep her safe.
They was moved from one home to another, and they did not let me know what the new home was.
No one knew how long the war was going to last. So children had to be moved when their true identities were suspected.
The first thing you did not do is make any list and any names. You had it all in mind because it was too dangerous if there was anything written down. I had no idea if it would be 3 months or it would be 3 years. When people went into hiding, we tried to give them a new ID because they all had, of course, an ID with a J on it. And that's how I got involved with the underground, actually, because they are the ones I had to get the ID cards from.
The underground, or the Dutch resistance, were ordinary citizens from churches and independent groups who organized after the February strike. The strike happened on February 25th, 1941, in protest of the rounding up of Dutch Jews by the Nazis in Amsterdam. 300,000 people joined the general strike, but the Nazis harshly suppressed them after 3 days. After that, resistance groups formed, but all activities went underground because of Nazi suppression and Dutch Nazi collaborators.
Dutch Nazis who were betraying other people. There were what we call a bounty hunters, which was paid for by the government, or about 70 people who were specially trained. They got a weekly income. They got money. Everybody who brought in a Jewish person got so much money from the Nazi government. And of course that is always tempting, especially if you don't have any job or have no income. I mean, to save your own life and have other people dying because you save your life, how can you live yourself? It's unbelievable.
Many resistance members were also betrayed. They had to defend themselves, as well as turn to clandestine activities.
There were people who, were trying to sabotage and do anything or everything against the Nazis. I had a cousin who was just a year younger than Nick, and he actually became very important in the underground area, especially in the Hague area. Dutch Nazis, he was told to kill some of them, and he did. This is during the war.
The resistance soon invited Carla to do more work for them. She had just gone back to a private college to continue studying medicine. Thankfully, it wasn't the kind of work they had asked her cousins to do.
It happened. The first one they asked, and then the next one asked, and then the next one asked. So.
But you didn't say no.
Oh, no. No. Every evening at 6 p.m. there was a broadcast in Dutch from Radio London.
In een nieuwe wereld. Zij zullen dan onverwijld.
There would be a code word in the underground. I heard when there would be a dropping, as we call it. At night, a small airplane which would drop those ID cards when we needed them, and also little machines to make the thumbprint. And they got me the ID cards which were blank, and I could fill them out myself as the people's name. And
Carla would forge over 100 ID cards for the resistance using a mimeograph and a typewriter dropped by the planes from England. Food was rationed so that those hiding Jewish families could not get extra food. Carla was invited to fix that.
The problem is food became very severe, but then you cannot ask your host and hostess from the little food they got that they feed you. So that was another thing I got involved with people in hiding, got the rationing cards to them.
Carla had to take ration cards stolen by the resistance to the families in hiding so that the families would not starve.
One of the things I did in the underground was courier work, and the way you recognize each other, that you know they have the right people. You have a piece of paper which is cut in a certain way.
So like a bunch of little...
Yeah. She does that much better than I do. There we go.
Like that?
Yeah. So that's yours and that's mine. So.
How did you know where to find them, and how did you ask them about their paper?
I'm trying to remember, but I think one way was that I was told I would meet a person, or I was always told it would be male or female. And meeting at the, let's say at the lantern, at a post somewhere out, not too far from the railroad station, and that person would be waiting there. And so they know I was the right one, and I knew I had the right person. So,
so I would say for teenagers, Carla was you. She had barely finished high school.
How dangerous was it, and were you ever nervous about it?
I think I was always nervous. It was always dangerous too. But when you're young, you take more risk than when you're older.
That's true.
So you are never too young to act courageously.
Carla printed pamphlets for the resistance. This one was for young girls titled, "Do Not Help the German War Effort." This one was a form to get a second distribution of food rations.
I became pretty good at it because, I had to type it in and make the thumbprint, but so that, and one time there is a little story.
Don't get any ideas, kids.
But the more Carla did for the resistance, the more careful she had to be. And she took drastic measures to protect herself.
You try to protect yourself somehow. You were very careful walking out, even in the street. You became very much aware what was going on. You tried not to have any contact with the Germans. You stayed as far away as you could. And being on a bike was the best way for me, because if you saw some area where there was German soldiers, you just turned around and went to a side street and tried to avoid it. You know, I became Catholic during the war, and they won't look at you, you're not Jewish anymore. Of course, it didn't make any difference. I don't really know how I coped with it, but I do know that, again, you had to be so careful that automatically you didn't talk to other people. Basically self-protection. And that came way ahead of the social part. And I think I probably missed the sports at the time the most, that I couldn't go rowing anymore, I couldn't go skating anymore, all that sort of thing. And I also ended up by getting this German nurse's uniform.
So how did you get your hands on the nurse's uniform?
Well, actually, I was studying for medical technology, and you do a lot of practical work in a hospital. And I bought that nurse's uniform. Though I had also a little certificate to show that I was a legitimate nurse, which of course I wasn't, but and that I did steal.
Carla stole and forged a German nurse's ID to complete the disguise that she still has today. I can't believe she did that. She was a total badass, but all these actions were necessary to survive.
Nazi.
Okay, my name is Brian. I'm a member of the church here, Spokane Valley United Methodist Church. And I know this is not about today, it's about what happened in World War II, but we're seeing a lot of parallels happening today. And I want to know what you think we can do as maybe the religious community here or just concerned citizens, actions that we can take.
One of the things that I appreciate about this is it reminds me of how important we talked about this morning community is. And the reason that I like you all, some of whom I know and some of whom I don't, is I like the opportunity to make a reality check. Because sometimes I wonder, am I just nitpicking or should I write a letter to the editor? Am I just, was that really a microaggression or was it just somebody who didn't know? And so I think as a community, if we keep in touch with each other and say, am I just nitpicking, or is this, one of the signs, it's really helpful.
Thank you for this film. I have two questions. One is, what happened to the rest of the Anne Frank family who did not get shipped out? And two, there is something, I want to piggyback on your question, there is something we can do in Spokane. The federal government is now leasing contracts for detention camps in this area. One is in Yakima and the other is in Tacoma. Detention camps to house migrants who will be rounded up in the coming days. They will be put in these detention camps prior to being shipped back to their countries of origin. So we can be aware of those camps. They're called private prisons. Those contracts are being let out as we speak with our federal dollars. The other is the Spokane County Jail leases cells to ICE to detain migrants who committed no crimes. So we can do something about that.
I think the parallels that you're drawing are what are really critical here, right? As we learn what happened and how this began at a very slow boil, and how society supported the laws that were in place, and how we need to be vigilant in our awareness in what's happening.
One of the things that was talked about in the film was how the Germans shut down any kind of radio or communication except for what they had to say. And in our culture, it seems like that table has been turned where with the internet, I call it hate radio, hate broadcasting, that they have dominated the narrative, and so we find ourselves in a situation like this, I believe, because countless people do nothing but watch, hate internet, and so all the more that somehow we need to become a louder voice than that. Our voice in whatever way, whether it's through local newspapers or our own radio or some counter narrative or online or whatever gets out there, and voices that the prophetic voice, I'm going to say it, of the church, which has been gagged and muted, I believe, or co-opted for the other side. How is it that the voice of the church is speaking for evil? So what about the voice of the real the people that hold biblical truths to be? Anyway, we need our voices to get louder, more constant on every place we can get it.
Thank you. I think maybe one more comment, because we have to wrap it up just for the transition, and I know there's so much more to say. Go ahead, Joan.
Thank you, Kristine, for your work on this. This is fantastic, and I hope we can get it into the schools where there can be good discussions with teenagers about it, for sure. Others too, but I think teenagers need to see it. Two things that kind of spoke to me in terms of the recent comments, in terms of sort of current applications. One, the 10,000 children only that were accepted by England as refugees from the Holocaust. And so what are we seeing right now with this kicking out of immigrants, limitations on immigrants, people having to carry their IDs everywhere? And I'm hearing from lots of people that, they may be citizens or documented, but they're carrying ID everywhere now because they might be caught up in these sweeps, because it's not exclusively non-citizens, which would be problematic enough, right? But so that, and also that discussion of labeling and lists, right? This creation of lists. I was on a call a week ago with faculty from around the Northwest, trying to make sure our universities are not keeping lists of undocumented students or of trans students or anything like that that the government can then ask for, because if we don't have it, they can't request it. And so I think that's another thing to be thinking about, like what lists or documentation do we have in our institutions, and where does that data end up, and can we get rid of that?
I want to be really respectful of the all the work that's gone into the different sessions. So if you'd like to stay for a different portion of the documentary that's got a little bit more of a contemporary focus, please feel free to stay. And I hope that you'll be able to connect with so many groups that are here. One of our strongest strategies is to control the narrative, right? To celebrate what we value, to celebrate what we believe in, and to counter hate speech with free speech. Yeah, thank you. We're going to do here, knowing that you may want to stay or you may want to go to a different session. We're going to spend the bulk of our time watching an excerpt from the documentary Carla the Rescuer. So again, if you were here at 1 o'clock, this is a different excerpt of the film. And if you're joining us now, I just have a few things to kind of catch you up on so that this excerpt of the film will make some sense. This time period that we're going to focus on is going to be looking at from the end of the war through today. And for those of you that I haven't met yet, my name is Kristine Hoover, and I'm professor and chair at the School of Leadership Studies at Gonzaga University. And I want to let you know that the woman whose life story we're trying to tell, Carla Peperzak, as well as the director of the film, would have been here today. They would have loved to have been here with you, part of the Q&A. But they had scheduling conflicts. So I'm going to do my best to try and do justice to the work that we're trying to accomplish here. So the film Carla the Rescuer is about the life of Carla Peperzak, who some of you may know. She happens to be a mere 101 years old. Like literally, she's 101 years old. And she's a member of our Spokane community who directly saved the lives of 40 Jews during World War II. And she continues to be prophetic today with her message of hope and wisdom and a commitment to the humanity inherent in each and every person. As many of you may know, Carla is so real, so welcoming, and is a driving force of nature. Working on this project has touched my heart forever, and we have been, and hope you too, will be propelled and compelled by Carla's strength of character and her leadership. Carla will share her story to speak out about the atrocities of the Holocaust and the importance of respect, empathy, and standing up against injustice. Hers is a story of strength, resilience, warmth, and hope. She's deeply committed to honoring the memory of her family who were killed during the Holocaust. 80% of her family was killed during that time, as well as many other friends. In this excerpt, we hope you'll be able to connect with her humanity. Carla's story would be an extraordinary and inspiring if it were only about preserving the history of an incredibly courageous young Jewish girl during World War II. But it is also about her continued work today. During World War II, Carla was a young woman, a nursing student, a healthy person with a bicycle, and she wrote newsletters and joined the Dutch resistance. She asked of herself how she could, with her resources, do something when the Nazis invaded Amsterdam and the Netherlands in 1940. And today, at 101 years old, she continues to ask herself the question of how she can still make a difference now, and she also invites each of us to do the same, in what ways we can come together in search of a greater respect for one another. So as a little background, Carla was born in 1923, and she was born in Amsterdam, living there with her father, mother, and sister. She played field hockey, she attended religious school with Anne and Margot Frank, and she lived a half a block from the Franks before they went into hiding. She had a relatively normal life until 1940, when she was 17 years old, and that was the same year that the Nazis invaded the Netherlands. In 1941, the Nazis forced Jews to register and get IDs and marked them with J's. And for her safety, her father was able to get the J removed from Carla's ID so that she could be in hiding in plain sight, so to speak. So our attempt at amplifying Carla's message for all time and all generation comes in part in the film through 4 generations of voices that you'll hear. The majority of the narration is done by Carla's great-granddaughter, who is about the same age now that Carla was during the war.
As we watch this 40-minute excerpt, I hope you might reflect on what it means when hate goes unchecked and what respect means for each of us. Thank you. It's about 40 minutes, and then we'll have maybe a little bit of time for Q&A afterwards.
At last, food drops by American bombers brought sustenance and hope to Carla and those in hiding that the end of the war was coming soon.
I remember we got white flour. We hadn't seen flour for years. I gained 70 pounds, I think. Things I hadn't had for, bananas I hadn't seen for years, of course, but there were other things, well, actually all the food. It was so great to be able to eat it that I ate way too much of it.
On May 5th, 1945, Canadian and Allied troops liberated Amsterdam.
I remember that when the Canadians came in, and we enjoyed that very much. I don't remember exactly what it did. I only remember that it was a tremendous relief. A tremendous relief.
Carla's families could finally come out of hiding and celebrate. But there was one family who still needed to find each other.
After the war, when the parents came back, they asked me to find that little girl because the youngest one, we knew where she was. She was not moved, but the older one was moved. We had taught her a different name, and so she didn't remember her old name. My sister knew some Canadian officers, and one of them I asked if he would be willing to come with his jeep up to the area where she was first into hiding, and my intention was to go to the first home and ask him where the next one was. We stopped somewhere, and right away a lot of young kids come around the jeep and ask for candy, and the soldiers always had lots of candy, and there was one little girl standing there, and she looked at me and she said, "Carla." So she found me. And then in 2017, we had a small family reunion in Holland, and we asked her to come, and she told the story.
Carla helped hide 40 people and helped rescue over 100 individuals with the IDs that she had forged. Their names will not be revealed for their protection. But many still live in the Netherlands today and have families of their own. The Dutch government and military wrote several letters of recommendation commending her actions during the war. Carla started studying to become a doctor, something she had wanted to do before the war. One day, at the University of Amsterdam Library, she met Paul.
I was preparing for the exams for the school in the University Library in Amsterdam, and I really wanted to study medicine, and that's how I met him, actually. He was studying tropical agriculture. He was born in Indonesia and wanted to go back to Indonesia, and here in the library you were not allowed to talk. So he would follow me outside the library, and then we would have a cup of coffee together somewhere. There was a little restaurant right across from the library, and I still remember the name there. It's called the Lido. We married in November, and 3 weeks later he went to the States because he had gotten a scholarship through the Institute of International Education. And I had no idea when I could follow, and that was tough. I stayed home, of course, at my parents. I remember him saying once, that he wanted to travel, and I said, okay. I think we moved 13 times overseas in those married years.
Carla left her parents and her sister in February 1948 to begin her life in Ames, Iowa, where her husband was waiting for her, but not before accepting one more mission.
I was working for the blood transfusion service, and we were doing some research in those years on the Rh factor. And they asked me to take some blood to Texas, and it was frozen.
Carla boarded a ship bound for New York with a frozen vial of blood, which she had the crew keep in the ship's freezer.
And then when I left the ship, they gave it to me, and I had no idea how to get this to Texas. A Dutch friend who lived in New York picked me up at the time. We had a couple of hours before I was going to take the train to Iowa. And there were Red Cross flags out all over. And I said to her, why don't you take me to the headquarters of the Red Cross in New York? And I asked them if they have a way of getting this to Texas. The Red Cross took me to LaGuardia Airport, and I could hand the vial to a pilot. What happened after that, I don't know. I have never heard any more if they received it, but I have a feeling they did. Can I say this only in America can happen? But isn't that amazing?
Together, Paul and Carla made their home in several different countries as they worked for the UN, helping nations grow food and raising 4 children.
He could charm anybody. I mean, he was a charmer. My father was the pianist, he was the artist, he was the scientist, he was the academic. My father worked for the United Nations and during most of the years when I was growing up, and he would go off on what they called missions. So he would go to China for 4 weeks or Nepal for 4 weeks, and my mother took care of everything.
My husband traveled a lot, but at the same time when he was home, he did not go to the bar or played golf or did anything. He really did a lot with the children. So he made up for his time not being home, and he was always very much part of the family.
My father was Catholic, and my mother, of course, deferred to my father, but she started talking about stuff. We would go to Holland, and we would drive to Holland on vacations, and we would go visit various Holocaust survivors, various family members and non-family members. And she would say, you need to meet this person, that person who went through this, went through that. I think that was a big thing she's passed on to us.
It was very, very, very difficult for her when my dad died. They were very, very close to each other. And she was really not willing to move to Spokane for a while because that would leave the memories of the last home she shared with my dad.
My mother really wanted to live very near one of her children, so she chose Spokane because Marion was the most welcoming.
She ends up moving to Spokane. She's 80 years old. Total change in direction in her life. She comes by herself, granted I'm here. But within a year, she knew more people than I probably know in Spokane. And everybody knew her too. And you know, she'd made a life, she'd made a name for herself, had many, many friends. And then Mom joined the Jewish congregation here, the Reformed Temple, and met a woman named Eva Lastman, who spoke to schools about her experiences, and she was interred in camp. And my mother joined her a couple different times at speaking engagements. And then when Eva took ill and eventually died, my mother felt she couldn't just let that ball be dropped.
And out of that came this very powerful desire to keep the world aware of the Holocaust and what can happen.
What struck me as most unique or most amazing is that she has decided to share her story. And she decided to do that on a regular basis when she moved to Spokane. But in the beginning, the stress was really very challenging for her. Just the night before, she couldn't sleep. The night after, she couldn't sleep because the memories had come back the night before.
It was too painful to start with, but also you wanted to go on with life and you wanted to forget about it, which didn't work, by the way.
She's worried about, will she give a good enough impression? Will she convey to her audience what she hopes they will hear?
This is very difficult for survivors to do, because every time they tell their story, they have to go back into their past and into their memories, and they saw things that we can never experience and we can probably never imagine.
Watch it in the community, so thank you all for being here and watching that together. I was going to maybe start with just what your relationship is to this story today. What does this mean to you to see it all represented, and what does it feel like to have this period of history so much part of your life today?
I still live it every day. And this is not easy.
She lost many family members, and she saw many Jews being taken away whom she could not help. And I'm sure this is beyond difficult for her. Carla is showing, I think, the same courage in making this film and in all her public speaking and education in schools and universities around the region at personal cost that she showed between 1942 and 1945.
She is an amazing one-stop power pack of a person. And she continues to tell her story. Why? So that people learn the definition of the Holocaust? No. So that the hope is that through these individual stories, that hopefully people will be inspired to follow her example, to recognize this is what happened when hatred went unchecked. This is what's continuing to happen in the world when hatred goes unchecked. Look all around us.
Unfortunately, it's become normalized, and that's really frightening, that there's that casually you can say these things. You can say jokes about Jews in ovens, and kids kind of just sneeze and walk away. And I hear it regularly when I speak with the high school students. But there was one school district where we went in to meet with the principal, and we said, hey, this is going on in your school. And she said, we don't have any Jewish students in the school. And I said, oh yeah, you do. You have, I named 5 students who were members of our congregation who were in their school. They experience a fair amount of anti-Semitism in school. One of them had told me this story about something they were teaching about the Holocaust in the classroom, and some kid raised his hands in the class and said, oh, there are no Jews alive anymore today. They were all killed in the Holocaust. There are no Jews anymore. And this kid was like, hello, I'm here, but that was the degree of the level of ignorance. And, again, it's kind of hard to label how much, that was malicious or how much it was ignorant or some combination of both. But that was pretty remarkable to see, to hear that from a principal, to realize, to not having recognized that there were any Jewish kids in the school. And Spokane in particular, Jews are such a small minority. The Jewish kids have a certain level of anxiety or fear, and some of them don't even tell anybody that they're Jewish because they have the choice not to. And so they just jettison a Jewish identity. And so we see kids from our community do that too, unfortunately, even in the present day.
You really typically do not address leaving Judaism and becoming a Catholic in any of your presentations.
No, I don't. Because I don't know how the audience accepts it. Some people may be very upset with that. The idea that I left Judaism was in the hope to, a Catholic, they won't take you. I thought it would be the best thing for me for safety reasons.
But you did this all before you met Dad, and
oh yeah, way before.
And then Dad being a Catholic, that's why you chose to raise us Catholic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How do you feel now about having raised us Catholic and not Jewish?
I'm sorry about it. At the time, I thought it was really the best way, to be away from Judaism.
It's entirely understandable, given everything that she went through, that she would choose not to potentially put her children in the same situation that she had to face, or that she would choose to try to make it easier for herself and her family.
The choices Carla made to protect herself and her family are the same choices Jewish teens make today because of the world they face.
So we have security every time we have an event, basically, in this building, whether it's worship services. Anytime we know we're going to have a substantive number of people in the building, we hire security to be able to make sure that we're all going to be safe. And our kids know that, even though we try not to make a huge deal out of it. They are fully aware that there were shootings in synagogues around the country.
There's a great deal of targeting going on, and it's not just informal, it's now being used as a political platform by individuals and political movements who have very clear agendas to restructure our society in what I may call fascistic ways.
There's so much information out there that's misinformation, especially today in the political world.
And when I first moved to Spokane in 2010, I thought, oh, this is like so over the top that we have a security guard all the time. And I just didn't understand why it was necessary. And even the folks who were telling me the stories about the Aryan nations, I'm like, okay, but they're kind of long gone. And now I feel very differently about that. Neo-Nazi and white supremacist ideology has reared its head again in a very frightening way in our country that was different from the way it was 10 or 12 years ago.
If anything, there's more targets of hatred, bigotry, intolerance, discrimination, acts to marginalize, silence. I think this has to do with the ease with which hate speech and hate images and hate ideology can be disseminated in the 2020s now.
The hope for me is that when I talk to the youngsters, that they realize that, you know, it can happen again. And we have now the far right in the United States, which is not a very good situation. And that they realize that, hey, I can do something about it by, you know, doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And that is the reason I'm talking to youngsters. And that I wonder how much of a reaction the youngsters have to do for that.
I have had many people say to me, we can do all we want to try to prevent that, including, you know, making it as public as possible, but it's not really going to stop.
I think people seem to gravitate and live and occupy time within their own echo chambers that's very self-affirming. And very sadly, and I see this a lot even amongst many teenagers I know and work with still today, is that they become dismissive to the point of being exclusionary of others.
I think one of the traps that we sometimes fall into, and I know this has also been the experience of our kids, is that they spend so much time teaching about the Holocaust and they don't teach about who Jews are, what their regular lives are like, or about anti-Semitism today. It's like, this is a thing that happened in the past, and now it's over with.
It's always like a really sad subject, and when we talk about it in school, like, there's not a lot of like fun aspects. So it's very like sad. You can tell like everybody's like, they feel sadness for like the people who were involved in the Holocaust.
Kids won't empathize with round numbers, as they say. They won't empathize with numbers like that. That's an impossible figure. 6 million. 1.5 million children were murdered during the Holocaust. But what they can do is empathize with individual stories. And so therefore, Carla's story in that respect really helps because she's a Jewish person and she's a rescuer.
When I was in, I don't know, 5th, 6th grade, and I asked you to come to the class because I thought it was neat that you knew Anne and Margot Frank, why did you say yes to me?
I don't remember. I absolutely, I must have at that point thought maybe it's okay to do it, but I don't, literally I don't remember why I said yes.
I caught you at the right moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I just remember everybody being fascinated by the things that, I mean, it was the things that you'd see in a museum that she just walked in with and put out on a table. You had the star, you had the ration cards, you had various photos, you had, I think, some sort of ID. Everybody was a little bit in awe and surprise, like, oh man, like, this is way more than I expected it to be. I had no idea what I was asking. I thought she just knew Anne Frank. I don't think my teachers knew either what they were getting.
So it was a good thing I came to talk, right?
Yeah. The original date of Yom HaShoah is associated with the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which was, of course, a rebellion that was organized in the Warsaw Ghetto to fight the Nazis, which ultimately failed in that moment. The question that always comes up of like, how did the Jews go like lambs to the slaughter? Why did nobody fight back? But in actual fact, they did.
Carla's story as a rescuer is really, really important because for so many decades, the popular view, and even one that was perpetuated in scholarship, was that of Jewish passivity, and that Jews were objects to be acted upon by the Nazis. Jews acting as rescuers, that's really a very still understudied topic.
So Carla is a reminder of the fact that there were Jews and then also a lot of non-Jews who really who looked at the Nazis and saw that it was evil and wanted to respond by fighting back, even if that was subterfuge. The actual official name of Holocaust Memorial Day in Hebrew is Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura, which is the day of destruction and also of bravery. I look at her sometimes, just even when I'm leading worship services and she's in the congregation, and I think about what incredible bravery she must have had to do all the things that she did, and to live with that amount of anxiety and fear on a regular basis and not let it stop you. Do what she knew she needed to do in that moment.
So what she did in terms of actually helping fellow Jews to find hiding places, that's incredibly courageous, and as far as I know, it's a very rare act. I mean, this is a brand new chapter.
My great-grandmother, Carla, a Jewish rescuer, still wears a necklace every day. It's a reminder to her of who she is, what she believes, and what causes her to act.
Part of the reason that Carla stood up was because she had beliefs, strongly held beliefs and convictions of what is right and what is wrong. A lot of it came from her family, just what was normal for her. Part of it came from her religious community.
Judaism follows directly on the teaching of Genesis that says that human beings are created in the image of God. And the implication of that is that we treat every human being with the same respect and dignity and even awe that we might also use to relate to God. So that requires of us not to dehumanize people. That's an expectation and a fundamental teaching of what does it mean to be Jewish, is to treat other human beings in that way.
What would you like us to do to help other people?
I think the number one thing is that you, like I said, respect, and that you try to help people if you can.
Every talk that Carla gives, and I've heard a lot of them, she ends by she wants people to respect each other. You know, I think that is her code word. It means seeing dignity and value in every human being, whomever they are. Everybody's a human being.
Also, tolerance is important.
You know, this Dutch concept of tolerance is just that. It's not just tolerance, it's empathetic understanding. I think that was a big thing she's passed on to us. You know, the lust for experience, the lust for understanding other people's cultures, and all that leads to some happiness, I think, too, in a lot of different ways.
Let's think about all of us as people who happen to share the same space in this planet at this time. Recognize that and share the space, because it's not just yours.
If you're religious, you can view them as a child of God. If you're secular, I think it's enough to say they have life, they have value, and they deserve the same respect that I do. That is at the core of what drove her, and that, I think, is at the core of what makes us human beings. Do we see other people as humans, or do we allow ourselves to stop seeing certain groups as humans? I think all of us do face our own challenges today, whether it's online or whether in our schools or our neighborhoods or communities. There are always challenges.
If someone like Carla sticks up to save people, why can't we learn from that example, as opposed to just passively watching people continue to say and do awful things towards other people?
Respect is a direct response to dehumanization, right? It's the opposite of dehumanization that she witnessed in her life. And so I think she couldn't imagine how you would kill somebody like that. But she watched it happen, which requires of her to then respond and continue to educate all of us on how to respond to that. And if her teaching is respect, then I think that's what we all need to go with.
You will have a choice, just like Carla had a choice to just pretend nothing was happening and protect herself, or to try step in and make a difference. So I think what Carla's doing is giving an example, and she would like to inspire the young generation of today, but everybody has to make a choice as to how they're going to respond to her invitation.
We know it is tough to act, and it's easier to not do anything. But whether you realize it or not, you're treading the water right now.
Like any invitation or call, everyone has to make that decision. Do you hear it or do you not? If you hear it, are you going to accept it or not? You can always say no.
Just imagine if Carla had decided not to pick up her oars. If she had said no and decided not to act.
There are consequences for saying no. You may not suffer, and things may be easier for saying no, but there are consequences individually and for the larger community.
We had just a nice chat, just asking, like, what's your secret? How are you so healthy? How are you doing all this? And she said her secret to a long, happy life is never say no to an invitation. And I have never forgotten that. And she said, it's not just, it's about your mental health. You go out, you socialize, you're never going to get depressed. Even if you don't want to go, you just go. And it keeps your brain fresh. You might be exposed to new things, meet some new people. And so I always think about that, because so many times I don't want to do anything.
And what if you did say yes? What if you decided to take action?
If you say yes, there will be risks and checkpoints to pass through. It can be emotional, it can be intellectual. You may lose friends, you may be in confrontational situations, but on the other hand, you can impact a lot of people.
And what if it doesn't have to be perfect? Because you wouldn't be alone.
Here comes the microphone. What is your question?
My question is that I wonder what the Holocaust was really about, because things get messed up in history all the time.
So what was the Holocaust really about?
It's a very interesting question, because the Holocaust was, the Nazi regime had decided to get rid of all the Jewish people in Western Europe, or in Europe. And that is the Holocaust. And they managed to do for 6 million people. They also killed another 5 million people from people who were, not handicapped people were killed. People who had some mental problems were killed. They wanted a perfect race. And that was the reason for the Holocaust. And it was called the Aryan race.
So anyone that didn't fit the criteria of that perfect race. Yeah. Thank you for that question, by the way.
It's really important that students understand that Carla was not this one-woman superwoman who was somehow able to do this. She was part of a larger network of resistors, and you can't do it all by yourself. If someone wants to make a difference, they can find networks, and they need to build networks to work together. So you're never alone when you do this.
Remember how Carla transported the vial of blood to New York without any idea how she would get it to Texas? And how shocked she was at how many strangers were willing to help get that blood vial there? Today, because of the actions of many people, the proteins of blood cells and the Rh factor are known, and countless lives have been saved. That was my great-grandmother's first encounter with the people of the United States. Like her, they didn't shy away from helping strangers.
I think that a lot of people go through life not really thinking about any of these questions, which makes it so easy then to manipulate them. The Nazis had to get many of the German people to agree that some Germans are better than others. Some people are Germans, some aren't Germans. And what we find in Germany is that both through fear of being targeted yourself, but also I think through people trying to pile onto the bandwagon and curry favor and show that, yes, I'm a real German and I love the Nazis, that the vast majority of Germans abandoned their Jewish neighbors.
And it's been continuous throughout all of history. It almost seems like anti-Semitism, the longest ever hatred that was occurring hundreds of years before Christ, for Pete's sakes, continues to be subordinated as if it's not really quite at the level of like really being mad about something. People like to put these in these terms, and even if they don't ever state it, you can tell by media response and reactions, can't you? It's like, oh, this is against Jewish people. Anti-Semitism's this. Why would we ever be willing to accept hating or judging anybody for any reason?
Silencing is a precursor to elimination. Don't let yourself be silenced, all right? Stand up, even if you don't know them. They may not be your friend, but to someone who's obviously being targeted, because it makes a difference if they know that they're alone or whether they're supported. It makes a difference to those watching if you know that they're alone or supported, because so many people are on the fence. They can be swayed one way or the other. And the example of a few individuals can often make a very large difference in how people see other people.
So this is an excerpt from the documentary, and there is more that came before, and there's more to the ending. I wonder what your reactions are. We have a mic helper.
I speak as a longtime member of the Spokane Jewish community. And in the excerpt in the past hour, the previous hour, Carla points out a lot of truths that still hold today. And one that struck me was that Germany was a highly educated, civilized society. And the point that she made from that is that this can happen anywhere. And I say that it has been happening for the last year in Gaza by Israel, by the United States, both highly educated countries. But still, there is all this denial, especially in the Jewish community here, of culpability over that and interpretation of criticism of that as anti-Semitism.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. Will the whole documentary be available to be seen by the general public?
So a couple opportunities coming up. There'll be the recording from the conference that will see the portions of it. If you're interested in seeing the entire documentary next week, it will be shown nationwide through the Anne Frank Center USA. And they're going to be, if you go to the website, which is up here, it's called carlatherescuer.org. You can get to the information there. But the Anne Frank Center USA will, if you register with them, you'll be able to watch the documentary anytime next week in its entirety. And then there'll be a webinar on February 2nd at 2 o'clock Pacific time with Carla. So you'll be able to talk with her if you'd like to do that. And that's a free registration. And again, there's that information and more at carlatherescuer.org. And you'll get a link to watch the documentary at your convenience during next week. And then the webinar with everybody together. Another opportunity, if you are an educator, that the film is available nationally for free to teachers through a group called Teen Screen. And also, if you're here in Spokane, there's actually a teacher professional development session on February 8th, and teachers will have access to the film for classrooms and lesson plans if they'd like to use it in their classrooms as well. Right now, we're trying to work out an agreement with a distributor like Amazon so that it would be available individually to anybody who'd like to see it. But right now, the educational distribution channel is the primary one we have, because really that's Carla's wish, is to educate the children in the next generation.
And so that's our next step, is figuring out how to make it even more accessible. Thank you. Oh, yes, sir.
He gave me the mic, so I want to piggyback on Mort's question. It could happen here. Our current president has used this phrase, "They're poisoning our blood." He was referencing illegal immigrants. This is the rhetoric that's coming from the very top of our nation now. So I think we're very close, and I'll just mention one more thing. Here in North Idaho, there was a group years ago before I got into this area called the Aryan Nation with Reverend Butler. That group no longer exists, but that ideology does exist.
Well, to build off of that, a couple things. The Keenans versus the Aryan Nation trial happened in 2000, and so this is the 25th anniversary of the marathon of standing against hate, right? Of not letting hate go unchecked. And I think that's a really important point of pride in our community, that we can and we have and we do come together to say that we value human dignity. And the more that we can remind ourselves that yes, it is a marathon, and yes, it is exhausting, and yes, it is hard, and yes, it is the work that we are called to do in so many different ways, whatever our resources happen to be. I mean, during Nazi Germany, who paid attention to a teenage girl? And Carla was able to use that as a strength and do things that many other people wouldn't have been able to do at that time. So with our unique, whatever it is that we bring to the table, whether that's through the legislative actions, whether that's through marches, whatever it happens to be, fundamentally it's through awareness first of understanding what's going on with the name calling, the dehumanization, us and them. So Marilyn Albright, a couple years ago, said the two most dangerous words in the American language are us and them. I just thought that was a really simple, but oh so powerful, moving way to remind us that we are one humanity.
I think this, it's related to immigrants, it's related to people of color, it's related to the indigenous people, it's related to homeless people. We have names that don't have the stories. But for Carla, it was members of her family. And I think that we're facing times like that now. I have grandchildren who are worried about their future and their safety now with people picking people up. And so I think we have to find ways to be there for each other now. This isn't hypothetical. No. It's now.
Yeah. I'm sorry. It's our family, our neighbors, our colleagues that are carrying IDs. Keep going back. There we go. Because they're afraid.
I'm kind of curious, did any of Carla's 4 children revert back to their Jewish faith?
No, they haven't. It's a mixed family in that sense. When Carla started participating in her Jewish life, she was 80 years old. And so her children were plus minus 60 and already had children and grandchildren of their own and their own traditions and rituals. So they participate with her in a respect of reverence for a higher power. Well, again, Carla would have been here with you because this message is so important to you, for her to share with all of you. And if you have an opportunity to just listen to the wisdom of someone who's been around the sun 101 times, I mean, in and of itself, the importance of our intergenerational connections and learning with and from one another, we thought it was so important in making this documentary that we tell it from a multitude of voices, that it be multi-generational, that it include people from all different or from multiple different walks of life,
and we hope that it will speak to people, encouraging them to continue to learn like you've been doing here today, right? So the first thing is awareness. The second thing is motivation. The next is your knowledge and skills to get out and do something. And then very, very importantly, to celebrate the successes along the way, because we need to nurture and encourage and stay together, right? To be strong with one another. So thank you very much. Oh.
The microphone's not working.
You want to take that one down?
Logan! Are you serious?
Is this on? All right, it is on. Well, my name is Pamela Leswaldner. Thank you for showing this. Thank you for your comments. I'm with Thrive International, and I've seen some of you at our table this afternoon. It is a privilege to be here among you and to stand together with you. And I think that that is one of the messages here in this documentary excerpt is we are not alone. We are standing together. We are doing something. And so as a community engagement coordinator at Thrive International, one of my initiatives this spring is to introduce Thrive's refugee immersion experience. And I have interviewed several refugees throughout many regions that Thrive has served. So Africa, Latin America, LGBTQ, all different types of groups of people included for their stories. And so what you'll experience is, or what this will do, is give you an opportunity to walk in their shoes. It's an educational experience as well, with Washington stats on refugee numbers, immigrant numbers. It's terms and definitions you would need to know. It is myths that needs debunking. So all of these things, it's not just showing up for an experience. It's scenarios through someone's story. So each and every person that shows up to this experience takes on an individual, their story, and you problem solve through it. And then you visit different stations along the way in its unique way. And at the very end, you will read their real life outcome. And not only that, with this experience, and this is what you're getting at as well, there's a call to action. What can you do? Hopefully it will inspire you to engage in the community. And that's what we want to do when we stand together for everyone, for dignity, right?
That's right.
So I'm very excited to do this. And check out our website. I hope to see you, your congregations. And yeah, thank you for giving me the mic.
Thank you. Oh, so we got one last comment.
So some of you may have seen Jen Hayward sitting outside in the morning asking about the naughty and nice. Some of you may have heard the sermon that was given by Bishop Buddy in Washington, D.C., asking for mercy. What do we do? How did South Africa end years, decades of apartheid? We don't want decades. There were some billionaire buddies that were standing by the president at his inauguration. And I am urging us to spread the word through our different denominations and different faiths to boycott the billionaires. Because the billionaires, the oligarchy, is behind this. The billionaires are behind this. They want to pit us against each other. We need to boycott the businesses that the billionaires are doing. They think they can get money by being buddies to I can't even say it, to the leader. But we need to also look at some of the different, Costco, for example, last night voted 80% of the shareholders to keep DEI. We need DEI. We can do it. We must not be disempowered by just listening to media. We need to find avenues for action. Already, I have spoken directly with people with the World Council of Churches who were responsible for the South African boycott and making it a global event. let's hope that we can do that.